Despite the best efforts of governments around the world, the concept of an affordable EV that's good is still rather elusive. Now, many car companies around the world, they've tried, I don't want to say they failed, but they haven't hit the mark of good. And that brings us to today, where we have a very unique opportunity to drive an early pre-production prototype of an affordable EV that has the potential to be good. Okay, now that we know what the goal is, how is this different than taking a Kona with a gasoline engine, ripping it out, and throwing in an electric propulsion system? To answer that, we have to go back to the development of the vehicle. This, unlike the first Kona, was developed to be an EV. So from here to here, whether it's gas or electric, it's the exact same vehicle. It's from here to the rear of the vehicle that changes. Like the length of this is just a wee bit longer than the length of the gasoline-powered Kona. Then there's the battery. There's actually two options. They're doing a low range and a long range. So the low range is 48.6 kilowatt hours, which translates to hopefully 200 miles of range. Then there's going to be this one, which is the long range. I wouldn't really call this one long range, but 64.8 kilowatt hours. Now, huge point of differentiation between this and, say, an Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6. The charging architecture is very different. This 400 volt, those 800 volt. So it changes the charging time. In other words, this isn't going to charge as fast to, say, 80% as an Ioniq 5 would. Then looking at it from a different perspective, the onboard AC charger is 11 kilowatts. Then there's the output. That changes depending on the size of the battery by about 70 horsepower, but the torque, interestingly, is the same no matter which battery one chooses. You know me, I love to kick off these episodes by sharing the weight of the vehicles that we're driving, but this is such an early pre-production prototype, the final weights and measures aren't in. So let's use the Kia Niro EV as a basis of comparison. That one's 3,721 pounds, but this car, if you remember, is a little bit longer now, a different platform. So I'm guessing probably about 4,000 pounds, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on how you express your weights and measures, around 1,800 kilograms. With that, EV. Oh, you know what's interesting? Right off the bat, you can tell there's torque there. It's good. It drives like an EV. Remember when you and I first drove the Kona EV? We would squeal the tires. We did it a couple of times with Craig Cole in the car. I remember back in LA. That was a hot rod. I really liked that car because it was so cool in terms of the way it delivered the torque. This one, clearly they've changed the torque profile here, and I would argue they've made it probably more usable. Again, very early pre-production prototype. So this, we can glean some information, but this isn't the final product. The EV we're driving is separated, at least from the outside from these cars, a couple of different ways. The lights change. Notice this one's more solid light, where the light on the EV, it's pixelated, much like the EV, the Ioniq 5 and the Ioniq 6. Also, the body color changes. Look at this one. This is the sporty one, so the cladding is body color here. But on the lower end models, the cladding is a different color. Not so with the EV. The whole thing is body color. Then there's the spoiler. This one has an unusually cool rear spoiler that's integrated well with a very unique center high stoplight. The one on the EV is a bit different. I would say it's a bit fancy. They've gone a bit Hollywood, where it's got a satin finish chrome strip over the daylight opening. And so we come to the important part, how does it drive? But that's a question where we have to find two answers. Number one, how does it drive as an EV? And then how does it relate to the standard gasoline version of the same car? Well, as an EV, it drives more docile. It's more normal. It's more down to earth. Remember when EVs first hit the market, they all had crazy amounts of torque and were fast. People were like, oh my God, EVs are cool because they're fast, but I really don't want one. It's more mature. It's like we've gotten to our sophomore or almost junior effort in this being a usable vehicle around town. Now, why I say that relates to the second question you and I have to answer. How does it compare to the gasoline-powered Kona? And there, you notice the length more here. in that, yes, it's more supple like the gasoline-powered Kona, but if you push it more aggressively, you notice the extra length. You feel the extra weight to it. And number two, and this is pretty important here, the size of the wheels. The basic Kona, those are fitted with 17s, but the car you and I drove, the gas car, they were fitted with 19s, which does change the ride quality. This one has the 17s, so the ride quality here is a bit softer. I would say much more usable around town. Now there are different drive modes here. That's normal. Let's go into sport. And here it does change the character somewhat. You definitely notice a different torque profile, but still not to the same level as the original Kona. That was more of a sports car, if I can go so far as to saying that. Then in terms of the way the car drives, it doesn't really change so much in sport mode because there aren't any adjustable dampers fitted to the EV. Then something very unusual, and again I want to say early pre-production prototype, the steering here is significantly better than the steering in the gasoline version of the Kona. You feel better weight here. It's still light, it's still a city car, but at the end of the day, it feels more natural, the steering here, and this is an EV. That is something you and I normally never see. Okay, so today you and I can't play around to the options game because I don't have any pricing. In fact, we're nowhere near pricing for the EV, but I wanted to come on and share pricing of the basic car to kind of give us some guidelines. This one is the N-Line, so it's kind of like the middle of the road, the more sporty model. This one is $33,385 the way it sits with all-wheel drive. Then there's a Limited, we've driven that one as well. That one has more equipment like vented seats. That one's $34,485. Now remember, those are the 1.6 turbo and has the multi-link rear suspension. So if you guys have been following Hyundai design over the past couple of years, I'd actually say decade, you've noticed they've taken a very different path, both in the people they hire as well as their designs. And now they're at a point where they're changing smaller things because they brush the very broad strokes. Just look at this thing. Look at the inside. They've changed the color here. Yeah, you look at it as a gray, but in this as well as the gasoline version, they've gone away from the German rainbow where it's nothing but silvers and grays and whites. They've actually gotten 5 like real colors, like different colors there. Here, yellow, not my thing, but notice what they've done here. They've got trim to pick up the exterior of this car, kind of like you can spec out in a Porsche. And then they've got some of the trim we've seen in the basic car, but this one even has trim on the seats that pick up the exterior color. But something really fascinating about this one, the tactile feel changes a little bit. It needs work here and on the top of the dash. But on the dashboard here, as well as the door panels, it's almost like a tweed or a twill or something like that, which transforms the feel of the inside of the car. I would argue they would need to do this in all of the Konas, not just in the EVs. And I'd even go so far as to saying perhaps cover the seats in that material, maybe have a two-tone type of situation to make the EV stand out, not just in the tactile feel. Okay, so what have you and I learned today? I would argue we've been able to answer one half of our question. Is it good? And they're unequivocal, yes. Yeah, it still needs some tuning. It's not trying to be the personality of an Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6, because those will arguably be at least $10,000 more. However, the other part of our question, and that's probably the more important one, is it going to be affordable? And here we come to the wish list. It's probably gonna be somewhere, 40 grand, 45 grand in the fancy one like this. But that, I don't believe, is the right solution. If one is trying to make EVs more mainstream, they need to be 30, maybe 32,000. And for the avoidance of doubt, that is absent any tax rebates, incentives, or other government schemes to push these things off dealer lots. Put another way, these things need to sink or swim on their own for them to have real adoption. And that's putting aside the question of where the energy is coming from, national security, all that kind of stuff we can discuss in other episodes. Now this gets me to what I'm really asking for. The Kona with a gasoline engine in the fancy model is about 35 grand. So what I'm asking for is an EV, doesn't have to be fancy, under the 35 grand. I know a huge ask, but this is what you're asking me to do when I look at a pre-production prototype. And I am just one man, so I turn this episode around to you to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you enjoyed this episode, I'd highly suggest you check out my episode where I talked to the Chief Technology Officer of Toyota, not Hyundai, Toyota, and he gave us a masterclass on how these kind of cars come to life. In other words, how big companies like Toyotas and Hyundais of the world deal with government mandates. Fascinating episode. You can check that out here. Till I see you in the next episode, bis später.